Art can be a window, and art can be a mirror. And great art is both. Son, you'll never be a true artist if there's always a mask between you and the viewer, especially when the viewer is you.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is one of the greatest games of all time. After a number of weeks of constantly hearing this from every corner of the internet, some people are kinda tired of the gushing, but that doesn't make it any less true. And while I understand the fatigue that comes from having to hear it all the time, the nature of this game's development and creation, and most pertinently, what this story stands for, are so important that I really hope the constant praise doesn't die down anytime soon. Not just because it's a phenomenal game and story, and not just because of the miraculous circumstances of its creation, but because of the way in which it celebrates the history of art, stories, and games, and how that has led to its own creation. Expedition 33 is a love letter of the highest quality to the significance and beauty of art, narratives, and video games. It takes pride in the fact that it exists. It celebrates the beauty of stories and how they will forever be immortal, forming a rallying cry for artists and a display of how these works of art can move us. Let's back up a bit to illustrate my point. Expedition 33 is, narratively and in terms of gameplay and game design, a marriage of so many different influences, and I see so many of my favorite works embedded in its DNA in one way or another. Throughout my first playthrough, I was reminded of both Nier games, of multiple Final Fantasies, but primarily of 10, of Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi, Xenoblade, Attack on Titan, Evangelion, Sekiro, Rakugo, Black Sails, Fata Morgana, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Chrono Trigger, and more. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Expedition 33 was inspired by all of these works, but it was so clearly influenced by some of them. The thematic and dramatic style, world structure, and gameplay leanings of Final Fantasy, the FromSoft-esque monster designs and parry system, action commands building off of Paper Mario's dynamism, an evocative intonation so reflective of Nier, sheer imagery reminiscent of Eva. Expedition 33 picks up the legacy of those before it, just as the Expeditioners do from their fallen comrades, and embarks on its own adventure, putting its own spin on these stylistics and trappings, imbuing its own identity despite being derivative, and passing it on for those who come after. Again, just like the Expeditioners.
Death is not necessarily final.
What does that mean?
Gustav lives on in other ways, right? Through your memories, through his influence on your life and everyone else's, through the Lumiere converter and his research.
For those who come after. Right?
This is a game that adores art and games and stories. It pays tribute to them and so clearly greatly appreciates their role in its inception. But at the same time, it is strong enough to more than stand on its own and comment upon this within itself. It is wholly its own thing through how it merges all of these derivatives together and how it celebrates art, and this element of the game to me is in and of itself the answer posed to one of the biggest and most controversial talking points about the narrative. But I digress. Expedition 33 adores vast worlds, stories that inspire the imagination, and deep and complex and lovable characters, and there is no shortage of proof for that. But one of my favorite narrative elements in the game that demonstrate this are the quiet, reflective bits of character exploration and internalization at the camp. The contemplative moments of profound calm where Ciel talks with a sage clarity about why she welcomes death, where Maelle and Verso share a loving moment of escapism on the piano as Esquier dances with joy. Renoir's quiet misery as he hovers in isolation biding his time as the curator. The hush shrouded over everything where you can just for a second forget about the tumultuous agony of the world. The character focus and reflective quiet in the eye of the tragic storm are everything. Essentially, these are the moments that accentuate that these characters are flesh and blood, beautifully realized and four-dimensional. The moments that demonstrate one of the biggest beauties of stories, empathetic character exploration. But in addition to that, there is simply the way that art is explored as a concept by the characters in the story. How Verso dwells upon how intimately he adores music and how much the story emphasizes that, and how Lune feels the same. The way that the party are so filled with excitement at the wonders of the world, at meeting Esquier, who they had only ever heard about in legend. Renoir's journal entry championing the profundity of art, how it is a window and a mirror, and the Mask Keeper's similar sentiments. Even Maelle's desire to go out and see the world as told in the beginning of the story is evocative of the classic hero's calling that we see throughout traditional fantasy. And how is all of this recorded? In a journal written by Gustave and Maelle to share the tales of their experiences to those who come after. Essentially, through a story. And of course, there is also the labor of love that the canvas world represents and is, as it is quite literally a world created from the wonderful imagination of a child brought to legitimate life within a canvas. Beautiful, rich, fantastical forests, a bizarre yet serene and otherworldly underwater marvel, snowy mountains, an island of wondrous yet haunting faces, whatever words you describe to Seren. And not to mention, aside from the narrative brilliance, this game just provides you with epic, hype encounter after epic hype encounter, reflecting the adrenaline-pumping glory that we love about video game fights and emphasizing it time and time again, celebrating one of the most beautiful things about this medium and art form. This is an experience and world that reflects all that the game developers, the creators, and us as story lovers love about losing ourselves in immersive fictional worlds and adventures, and it shows a love for the worlds that the artists behind it have explored and the bosses that they've fought. Except here, in-universe, it's very much real, and it's the perfect platform to form the most imaginative and insane and out-of-this-world beautiful setting possible, because that's what Verso did when creating it. The setting we travel in is literally a child's imagination of a grand, beautiful fantasy world with charming creatures such as the Grandis and Gestrels and Esquier himself brought to life. This world is a genuine miracle, and the darkness and danger within it is not inherently tied to its creation, but to the result of that imagination being used for selfish and flawed means as it is torn apart by Verso's parents and Clair too. The bastardization of this beautiful, fantastical reality, as well as the tragedy of the trapped nature of the characters within it, reflects a pure lament of what happens when people don't value art and life, either through ignorance or dismissal. Art contains the soul of the artist and potentially more within it, and so art must be treated with utmost respect. And so, Expedition 33's setting is a reflection of the beauty of storytelling and art and how it is awful when it's bastardized. And that's the thing. True artistic vision and imagination unfiltered is beautiful, but corrupted by greed and disproportionate hierarchy and pragmatism, or in our case, a lack of care or a selfish need, that vision is compromised and skewed. How many classics have we been deprived of because of mishandled priorities in past decades? But I digress. There is something to be said for the purity of imagination, stories, and art, and I don't think that this story has anything super specific to say about it, just that it's beautiful, and that it should always be celebrated, while at the same time showing the nuances of how dangerous it can be. Lumiere is a story in this game, but likewise it is real, as it takes form in a tangible way much more literal than the stories that we experience in our reality and offers fulfillment in the lives of those who otherwise have nothing. Now of course, as always, this cannot be abused and must be used responsibly, but the value of it, if done so, is clear. Throughout the game, we have such humanizing stories shown from those who could be viewed as simple fictional characters without sentience in-universe. But they are simply not portrayed that way, and that sentiment is essential. even in spite of Aline, who shows a god's cruel privilege through her selfish dismissal of the implications of her creations, sort of as an antithesis to Sophie's words about the cruelty of bringing a child into this sort of world. We also have Maelle, the original Verso, and the painted Verso, all of whom tout about how in spite of their tragedy, the world is real to them. Painted Verso in more subtextual ways than the other two, and how much the beings within it enriched their lives. It all just goes to show what I imagine the developers feel about characters or stories that they've experienced throughout their lives, how you or I may feel about our favorites. That art is genuinely life-affirming. It is a blessing and privilege that we must cherish, and we are lucky to live in a world where we can experience and take solace in works like this. The director of Expedition 33, Guillaume Broche, has confirmed that grief is not the main theme of the game, in that, while the game is largely about grief, it also tackles other things just as prominently, such as the nuances of life and art, and the relationship between art and the artists, as well as the nature of stories in general. And that is clear. In Clair Obscur Expedition 33, the line of, "For those who come after," is a passing of the torch, stated from the expeditioners who passed their torch onto Gustave, from Gustave to Maelle and onwards. But from a metatextual level, this idea shows that this game carries its own torch from the foundations established and the inspiration provided from works before it, offering its own identity and twist, and then passes its soul and spirit on to those who come after. It's a marriage of the themes of the game diegetically, and the role of this game in contemporary culture. It's a celebration that art and games and adventures exist, while also offering an interpretive tragedy of the pitfalls of escapism associated with art that we've discussed in other videos. Tomorrow comes, the sun will rise, and there is always a chance that things will get better. And tomorrow comes for video games and stories in general, because the future is bright for them as long as works like this are pushed and celebrated as much as humanly possible. This is what we need more of, so don't stop celebrating Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I certainly won't. Many thanks for watching.
Tomorrow comes.